بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
منهما رجال لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. ثم أما بعد. The topic that I will be addressing, inshaAllah, is called, or the title of my topic is False Portraits, Women in Islam and the West. False portraits with an S, that both women in Islam have been drawn a very false portrait by not only the Western media, but indeed this cancer of lies and biased propaganda has also reached Muslim countries and Muslim lands. This topic, the topic of Muslim women, is a topic in which fierce discussion has arose due to it, and proponents of either side hold that their view is correct. I will argue that the Western media has successfully managed to draw these false portraits, as I said, both of Western women and Muslim women. And I will argue that the West has gone from one extreme 2,500 years ago to another extreme which we see today. We have seen the extreme of women not even being considered to be human 2,500 years ago, to the extreme, I'll argue it's an extreme, that we find today prevalent in the West, that women, or that there is no difference between men and women. If we look at Islam, on the other hand, we will find that 1,400 years ago, as Muslims, we have been taught that men and women fundamentally are equal in status, but they are different physically, psychologically, emotionally, and so on and so forth. And therefore, due to their differences, they have different roles in society. That will be my line of argument tonight. We can begin with Greek philosophers such as Aristotle and Plato, and if we look towards their writings, we will find, when they discuss the issue of women, nothing else except that women do not possess souls, they were not full human beings, and therefore by nature deficient. They were to be looked down upon, and they were not to be trusted. And in fact, when you look at early Greek writings of philosophers and so forth, you will find that women in that society were treated no better than animals or slaves. And then this extreme evolved through to Christianity, where in Christianity we have the belief that Eve, or Hawa, alayhi salatu wassalam, was the cause of Adam eating what they say, the apple. And she was the cause, or woman is the cause of the downfall of man, and indeed humanity. And therefore, St. Thomas of Aquin, in his writings, proposed that women were the traps of Satan. And we find this very prevalent amongst early Christian writings. If we even look in the Bible, we can find a verse which says, "For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image of the glory of God." So man is the image of glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man was not made for woman, but woman from man. Neither man was created for woman, but woman was created for man. And this we find in the Bible, which you can just pick up and read. So therefore this had been the next stage of this evolution in the ideology, or in the Western ideology with respect to women. And this carried on until approximately 50 years before the birth of our Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which 50 of the great bishops, they got together in France and they had a world summit, a very important world summit. The topic? They were discussing, are women, or do women possess souls or not? And if they possess souls, then what is their purpose in life? Is their purpose to worship God alone, or is their purpose to serve men? Their conclusion, then evolved. Their conclusion was that yes, women now do possess souls, which was a break from the previous tradition. So women do possess souls. However, their purpose in life, concluded the summit, was not to worship Allah alone, but rather to serve men. This was their primary goal in life. And then we progress a couple of centuries ago in the 1800s, where the first writings appeared by both men and women calling for the change of these ideas, which were embedded in history. And therefore you got the origins of the first feminine movement. And so you had books such as Vindication for the Rights of Women by Mary Wollstonecraft appearing, which were being published at that time. But they were arguing mainly that they wanted to receive certain rights. And through these books and through this movement, you got a few rights that women were now given. Remember, we're only talking about 200 years ago, in which they, and then you, for example, in 1830, for the first time in history, in Virginia, in United States, you had legislation for the principle of separate estates of women. In 1868, and this was in 1860 in New York, women were allowed to own real property. However, they were prohibited from conveying this property without their husband's consent. Now we're only talking about 200 years ago. Less than 200 years ago. And then in 1931, you had this consent requirement that you need 1931 in Virginia, US. And this trend was throughout Europe and the Western world, America and so on and so forth. So it was only the last, towards the end of the beginning of the last century, that you actually had women actually allowed to own and convey property without the consent of their husbands. Islam allowed this 1400 years ago. And then the Industrial Revolution. So we can see how the point I'm trying to get across is the evolution. That first we have the women being treated not even as humans, they didn't even possess souls, they weren't human. All the way until now we had the Industrial Revolution, in which, in England in particular, women were forced to work long hours in coal mines and so on and so forth. And they were paid next to nothing compared to the men. So the idea at that time was equal work, equal pay. Equal work, equal pay. And this is not a problem in and of itself. And then the last century, after World War II, we had the feminist movement really catching drift, in that women began to question not only legal rights, but also sexual rights, morals of society. And they were saying that a lot of problems or a cause of many problems was the institution of marriage. So they wanted to break away from the shackles and chains of marriage and this what they call confinement and so on and so forth. And then the last chapter of this evolution is what we find today, and this started perhaps in the 1990s, in which the psychology books talk now about genders as opposed to sex. So one can be male or female as opposed to man and woman. So they're more masculine, more feminine as opposed to men, woman or male, female. And so they argued, or today we find a prevalent opinion, that there is no difference between men and women. That the only difference is a cultured difference, a nurtured difference that is due to environment. And if you change the environment and you change people's thinking, then men could take the role of women and women can totally take the role of men. You can actually swap the genders, if you like. So men can become feminine and women can become masculine. So we see that over 2,500 years, 2.5 millenniums, we've seen from one extreme that women are worse than animals. They don't even possess souls. They're not human. As was propagated by the Greeks. And famous, Greek intellectuals, philosophers, that people today look up to, like Aristotle and Plato. And they had this opinion of women till today, where there's no difference between men and women. Muslims, on the other hand, they don't believe that their concepts or their beliefs come from humans, or they change, or they evolve. Rather, we believe that our way of life, our deen, Islam, has been divinely revealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ. Doesn't He who created know? Doesn't He know best, the one who created? So we believe that Allah knows us best. And He is Al-Hakim. He's the all-wise. He's Al-Alim. He's the all-knower. He is Al-Khaliq. He is the creator. So therefore He knows His creation best.